This is Before It Was Headlines, It Was Prophecy. And I'm your host, Katie Elizabeth. This has been a monumental weekend for me personally because I completed my bucket list. The very first thought in my head was, wow, do you die after that? I don't know. But what I think is it's the opportunity to actually embark on my future only. I don't have anything lingering from the past that needs to be fixed, repaired. It's been settled. Now, I'm not saying it's all perfect. So, enough about me. Let's talk about this rider on the white horse. The first one to be released. And, I've always said I'm not sure when they were released, other than I would hear from Yudhe Vahe that they had been. So the rider on the white horse, I've never known for sure, but I've inadvertently, and during my last, I came across some information that indicates conquering for the good kind of thing, which is really how I see that rider on the white horse. That as he goes across the globe, that so much will be forced, supposedly for our good. So as a late boomer, I was born in 58, so I wasn't the early ones right after World War II, but I'm still included in that generation. And I have a few comments to make about the direction of our nation and the timing, as well as the responsibility. First and foremost, I openly admit to being as far off the plan of Yudhe Vahe in my early adult years as Abraham was with Hagar. I made a mess of my life in the mid-70s, and although I was socially productive and attempting cultural compliance, I didn't even begin to follow Messiah until 1994. And I can tell you there is a huge difference between being socially acceptable and being a child and walking as a child of the Most High God. And so that was 18 years amiss. But, as I said, basically socially acceptable. I went to work, raised kids, realized I was falling behind in the American dream, the usual. I didn't come to this information I'm presenting today looking for an excuse, but rather it was an accidental discovery of the decline of America. We can all pretty much agree that the 60s were monumentally a destructive time in our nation. Yet the generation that was rebelling really had very little actual control, and certainly not the financial power to bring any change. It's almost like our generation was the distraction and the decoy that we've come to accept now in all of our society, but I see this very, very differently than I had before. It was not the draft dodgers or the hippies that changed this nation. And sadly, too many young soldiers paid the ultimate price for a war that had no purpose or goal other than monetary increase for a select few. That's the culmination of my generation in the 60s. When the First Amendment was taken out of the hands of Congress and laid in the halls of justice before the Supreme Court, it was the interpretation of the amendment that changed our society. And this is when I found it just very interesting as far as being conquered for our own good. No laws were made. And I've said many times, I don't know when this rider, any of them were released. But I can see then that there's clear evidence that the rider on the white horse was clearly already riding across this globe. It's easy to look back in the 60s and see where the hearts of Americans became very accepting of the ultimate dependence that we see now. The decision for removal of a government prayer from school led to no prayer in school in 1962. And the decision to disallow scripture to be read followed in 1963. But what it was a government-written prayer. So it's like they created the scenario to then eliminate it, and it was just accepted. Angrily, but accepted. And then, like I said, with then in 1963, it was followed that there would be no scripture read in public schools. These decisions were not the action of single individuals. You know, Madalyn Murray O'Hair has been the single, held out singularly for years and years and years regarding this. But we need to remember it was the Supreme Court that decides which case they will even hear. And I'd like to take the time to share about two Supreme Court justices who clearly changed the course of America, or they were in power to do so. One, the same man who ruled the Supreme Court through both of these decisions, also headed the Warren Commission and delivered the report regarding the death of JFK, which we just observed that anniversary yesterday, the 50th anniversary. And he was the Chief Justice through both of these decisions about prayer in school and the reading of Scripture in school. So there we have the credibility of Earl Warren. Even to the point I was reading that President Eisenhower, by the way, was the only president to be baptized while he was in office. And so, a Christian president, everyone liked Ike, but whether or not he was a Christian was not important at the time he was elected. So, we could sit here and go back and go back and go back and see how many things that we've kind of revised through our social structure. But he did say that one of his biggest regrets of his presidency was appointing that Earl Warren as Chief Justice. Now, Potter Stewart is the one who really stood out to me. I find this gentleman very fascinating in what I was reading. And I'll tell you, it was very superficial reading at the time because I was looking, regarding these two cases about Scripture and about prayer. So how he voted on a lot of other things, I don't know. But I do know that this man had the boldness to be the lone dissenter on both decisions. That I do know, that I read. He stood staunchly and wrote his dissension alone. And he was very, very vocal in regard to the protection of the rights of individuals. There were a couple of cases cited referencing the Fourth Amendment as well, which I find very fascinating considering what we're going through now with search and seizure of all kinds of things. But anyway, this gentleman, Potter Stewart, I would really encourage you to do a little searching on him, because he had a boldness. Whether I agree with all of his politics or not, I don't know. But he sure had a boldness when it came to prayer and Scripture, that he was willing to stand alone. So while we as a nation chose to divide over generational differences in the 60s, political affiliations, and the truth of the matter is we missed the truth of the matter. Many chose to be sheeple in the 60s, with the dissenters being the troublemaking rebels. And maybe if we'd have, really had our eyes fixed on the example set by Justice Stewart, maybe we'd have seen where dissension might not have been such a bad thing. The establishment, as it was called, was already based upon many in power. What I learned in stumbling across these few facts is we can go all the way back to the pre-American days, really, and realize this direction has been in motion for many, many years. We can see that in the Roman Empire, all the way back to the Roman Empire. So this motion that has been established truly supersedes the individuals who come and go in positions of power historically. It's a direction that people choose, continue to choose. But our choice today is the same as it was when Joshua addressed the children of Israel in the Promised Land in chapter 24, the book named for Joshua. When he said, choose this day whom you will serve. And he even gave them the comparison. You can choose the gods of your forefathers, or you can choose to serve Yud-Heh-Vah-Heh. We're not going to change history, and we probably won't even get it all sorted out in studying it. We won't. Things get revised daily. But I do know for a future, for the present, for right now, choose this day. We can choose to come out from among the social traditions if we're willing to come out from among them and be separate. This has been, before it was headlines, it was prophecy. I'm Katie Elizabeth.